Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode is where the Trollhunters officially find the first Triumbric Stone, which is one of the 3 stones that they need to kill Gunmar, which is going to be a major, which of course is the end goal for this series. They have to kill Gunmar and stop him from bringing about the, they have to stop him from taking over the world and killing everybody with his troll army. That's kind of the point of the series. They're kind of building to that, so they kind of need a way to kill him. So that's where the episode opens up. But but that's what the main purpose of this episode is. But it does add a few additional wrinkles to it as well. So the episode, of course, starts off with Jim, Claire, and Toby in their health class, and Coach Lawrence is currently teaching the class, and he's teaching the class about how things are digested and made into poo, which is a topic that he's particularly uncomfortable discussing in front of the class, particularly around the part where teaching people how crap is made. That is obviously a thing he's uncomfortable with, but especially in a room full of kids who make those kinds of jokes. But there's a any case, as Coach Lawrence is actually giving his instructional thing. Jim proceeds to tell Toby and Claire what happened to him yesterday, about why he was covered in mud. About how he saw Angor Rot, but doesn't fully understand who he was, but also noted that whoever it was seemed to have been studying him, and of course this causes Jim and Toby and Claire to become a little creeped out, because, as they point out, that's very creepy, and they don't fully understand who he is or what's happening with him yet. But it's also that they do know whoever it is. He's very weird, and it's most certainly going to spell trouble if they have to face him again. But of course, it's this point where Coach Lawrence kind of somewhat reaches the end of his lecture. Somewhat. We'll get to that in a minute. But but of course, after making his lecture on the digestion system, to this point where Steve decides to interject with a bunch of crap jokes. So yeah, he proceeds to make a bunch of poop jokes and while just working them into casual conversation, and of course Coach Lawrence just begins to become increasingly frustrated with Steve for making a bunch of corny jokes in the middle of his class. Well, at which point Jim decides to shut Steve up and tells him to shut his hole, which inadvertently winds up being a poop joke in and of itself. And Coach Lawrence eventually gets sick of both of them, and then proceeds to send them to the principal's office, where it's this point where the two of them then proceed to sit down, and of course the two start arguing. Of course, Steve and Jim start arguing about who started it, of course. But then of course Strickler comes in, of course now Principal Strickler, and he then proceeds to point out that if Jim's getting in trouble again, and then proceeds to sit down and discuss matters, and it's of course at this point where Jim then proceeds to decide to confront Strickler about the fact that he's back, obviously pointing out that he has a lot of nerve to come back after what happened, and about he essentially pooped all over his parade, while of course Strickler points out that he wasn't quite done with Jim's education, and proceeds to tell him that he obviously feels like there's a lot more that Jim should be he could teach Jim. And of course Jim then proceeds to point out that he really should consider taking him out right then and there. But of course Strickler also proceeds to point out that as principal, he is in a position to make Jim's life a living hell. So he should really. There's also a bunch of things crowding around my thinking space, I'm just realizing. But he then proceeds to point out that Jim should really think carefully about threatening him. And meanwhile, Steve, of course, is part of this conversation. He hears this conversation, and Steve has no idea how to respond to any of it. He's very visibly confused as to what the hell they're even talking about. He just looks at both of them. At one point, interjects, pointing out that Jim's not speaking on his behalf. And then eventually, after hearing this whole back and forth between the two of them, and clearly hearing the hostility between the two of them, eventually breaks down and admits he's sorry for what he's done and decides that the poop jokes weren't all that funny to begin with, which is, very funny. But it is an interesting little thing, is that this is a person just being stuck in the middle of a conversation that had literally nothing to do with him. It was literally about him, having to battle. It was literally about Jim and Strickler's, complicated history as enemies. And of course, Steve, who by this point doesn't know trolls exist. He doesn't know about anything. He doesn't know about the Ballakilla Bridge. He doesn't know about any of the things that we're going to be talking about as the rest of the series goes on. He's just a normal guy living his life. He hears the conversation and he's just like, I don't know what any of this is, but whatever I did, I'm just gonna back right out right now. I'm just gonna say this. I'm sorry for making the poop jokes. They weren't funny. I apologize. But of course, the second Steve breaks down sobbing because obviously he doesn't fully understand what's going on. Strickler then proceeds to dismiss both of them and tells them both to go that they have detention and then proceeds to dismiss them. He doesn't say when they're serving detention, and considering Jim is currently currently goes to his teacher mission thing, his back to Troll Market after school, it seems to imply that it wasn't an immediate thing. But in case it is at this point where Jim then proceeds to meet up with Toby and Claire at the entrance to Troll Market, and he has his horn gazzle out and he's about to draw a door on it, but of course Steve points out that he should have ended Strickler and tells them that he really was considering it. But Claire, of course, points out the obvious problem that he can't, murder the principal in front of Steve. That would be very bad. And of course it's about the whole keeping balance and all of that thing that they have to do. They can't tell anybody about the magical world or anything like that because obviously that would be a big problem and cause a lot of, complicated issues. So for that reason, and of course that's the same reason that Jim has been holding off telling his mom about everything. So, that's kind of important. But of course, at this point where they point out that it should be fine, and that Blinky has something that he wants to tell them, so they'll just work it out. And Jim concludes that he'll just have to confront Strickler when he's alone, and that'll be the end of that. So, but of course, as Jim is getting ready to draw the doorway to get into the Troll Market, Claire feels like she senses something, but doesn't entirely know what. Only that she feels a sudden chill. And notes that something seems to be off, but she doesn't fully understand what she is and brushes it off as probably being nothing. However, unaware to her, it is revealed that Angor Rot is in fact watching all of them, and then proceeds to reveal an ability that he has, which is that he can remove his own eye and then proceeds to control it independently. And sure enough, he then proceeds to do exactly that, and proceeds to place his eye then proceeds to move inside of Jim's bag where it can hide and spy on him. And of course Jim, completely unaware of this, then proceeds to bring Angor's eye to their meeting with Blinky, who of course then proceeds to reveal that he is actually deciphered where the hiding place for what is it? For the stone is, he's found the first Triumbric Stone, which of course Jim is happy because that means they finally figured out where one of the stones is, and they do proceed to ask Blinky what he's found out, and of course he's found out that one of the stones that they're looking for is in fact the birthstone, and tells them that it is one of the three stones needed to hurt Gunmar. And of course, Jim wonders what exactly he's found. Jim wonders what exactly it is that he's found out. At which point, he also wonders what's so important about the birthstone. It's at this point where we're given another brief recontextualization of troll lore, which he proceeds to go on and explain how initially trolls did not know anything about the surface. They were content to just live in their underground caves. They did not know anything. They lived underground. They did not know humans existed. They did not know that there was a wider world that they could live on. They were just content to just live deep down in the depths. And of course, and eventually they you know, did eventually figure out that there was a wider world. They did eventually figure the beyond their caves, and decided that they wanted the surface, which of course caused them to fight amongst the humans. And this conflict resulted in their first Heartstone to rot from within, and then Gunmar was born. And throughout all of the, and I should mention, throughout this entire conversation, Angor's eye then also proceeds to leave Jim's bag, and proceeds to try and get a better view of what exactly it is that's going on. But nobody notices that Angor's eye is actually watching them. They just continue on with their conversation. And Angor is currently trying to glean information about what exactly is going on with the stones. But of course, he later admits he can't hear anything, so he has no idea what they're after. But of course, it's at this point where Jim proceeds to remark that now they know what's happening with Gunmar, and wonders what the birthstone is. But it's of course at this point where Blinky admits that he actually may or may not know where it is, because he points out that the stone was plundered long ago and was thought to be lost, but he's currently trying to find, and is currently in the process of trying to find out its last hiding place. At which point Claire then proceeds to remember the little limerick that they read from Dishonorable Bodis, and remembers that there were 3 hiding places: mountains, peak, deepest caves, and caverns deep. And proceeds to remember that that's most likely one of them that is currently hiding the birthstone. And of course they then could conclude that they're referring to Mountain's Peak, which of course they after some thinking then proceeds to Blinky then proceeds to realize it's in fact Gato's keep. And of course when they ask who Gato is, they then proceed to point out that more so Claire, and as a recurring joke, Blinky keeps getting interrupted by Claire, who is very excited and is currently trying to and is kind of figuring this out ahead of Blinky, and who is trying to get a word in edgewise and is struggling very much because Claire is very excited. But essentially what both of them ultimately arrive at is that Gato's keep is where a troll named Gato keeps all of his treasures, and concludes that if there's any place where one of the stones would be, it would be there. So they conclude that they'll have to make preparations to go off and go find it, which excites Toby because that means that they get to go on their first official Trollhunters quest. But also points out that they need to pack supplies and snacks and all those other things. And of course, Blinky encourages them to go do that. He tells them to go pack their bags, make sure that they have enough for the trip, and that they will in fact return and come back. And of course, it's at this point where Angor proceeds to return his eye to Jim's bag, and Jim proceeds to head home, and doesn't even realize that Angor's eye was in his bag. It just leaves as he's packing. And it's at this point where Barbara proceeds to confront him and ask him where he's going. And of course things have gotten a little bit strained with them lately, because obviously the whole situation where Jim is the troll hunter and can't tell her has obviously caused some problems. But it is of course at this point where Jim proceeds to tell her a lie about how he's going on a camping trip, about how he's going with Claire, Toby, and a couple of other people, and that he'll be back, but it will probably be a bit. But of course Barbara then proceeds to kind of roll her eyes, tell him that's when she was planning to tell her about this, and he points out that it just kind of sprang up. He didn't really have any sort of information or anything about that, about the whole situation. But of course they proceed to point out that whether she didn't allow him to go, what was his plan then. But he points out that it was ultimately really important that he kind of had to go. At which point she tries to ground him, telling him that he can't go, but he just admits that he can ground her, that she can ground him after, and then proceeds to just walk right out of the house, which of course it just exasperates her a little bit. And of course after he leaves the house, he just mutters an "I'm sorry" under his breath, and proceeds to get on his bike and proceeds to go back to Heartstone Troll Market. And of course, at this point where he meets up with Blinky and Arg, and as well as Toby and Claire, and Claire and Toby and Jim, of course, has packed all of these things he needs. He needs his troll lore, his troll related things, his Horngazzle, his Troll Hunter amulet, while Claire packed a little more practically, packing a first aid kit and a couple of other things they might need. And Toby packed tacos because they might need a snack. So, and of course, everybody just kind of rolls their eyes at Toby because obviously he just packs tacos, which is something he is usually just his go-to for whatever. But, of course, it's at this point where Blinky then proceeds to congratulate them on packing so thoroughly, and tells them that they're going to go, that now that it's time he's going to take them to where Gato is. At which point he leads them deeper into Troll Market, which the rest of the group notes that it's deeper than they've ever told them before, and of course it's at this point where Argan proceeds to mutter how he hates the Geyer. And of course, this proceeds to confuse some people and confuse Toby, Jim, and Claire, who don't know what a Geyer is and are wondering what he's talking about. And of course, it's at this point where Blinky then proceeds to bring them to the place where they're supposed to. And after Jim opens the Horngastle, it reveals the Geyer Station, which, as Blinky explains, is a place beyond the safe place of Troll Market, where their world larger than theirs ultimately opens up. And he then proceeds to explain what the Geyer is. He goes on to explain that the Geyer is this massive gyro wheel that is the fastest transportation they have. He openly tells them that, telling them that it'll take them anywhere they need to go in the blink of an eye. And of course, he then proceeds to tell them how it will ultimately take them where they need to go, and proceeds to reveal that Gato's Keep is actually in Argentina, which of course, well, or at least he points out that that's what the humans call it. He points out that it's underneath a massive mountain, but of course, it's at this point where everybody is just visibly confused, and of course everybody becomes concerned, especially Claire, because she points out that that's in a completely different country. And of course, this is this point where we find out exactly why Arg hates the Geyer. He goes on to because as Blinky turns it on and gets it ready and it goes whooshing off, they wind up going to Argentina from America in about half a second, which of course winds up causing Toby to become visibly nauseous. He walks off, and we don't see it, but we can hear him vomit into the rocks nearby. And of course everybody else is just visibly shaken up, except for Blinky, who points out that was a new record and that they've made it there in record time as he expected they would. But of course, Arg just proceeds to add that he hates the Geyer. But in cases at this point where they arrive in Ojos del Salado, which is the home of Gato, and of course Toby then proceeds to point out that that's not going to be good for his mobile plan. But they then proceed to walk inside, and it is a massive volcanic cavern. It is a very dark, but also a very dark and very dangerous looking place. And it's kind of the point. It's the inside of a volcano, and Claire does note that they do seem to be inside a volcano. But of course Jim then proceeds to wonder if where Gato might be, and of course what we find out is that Blinky has in fact never actually met Gato him personally, and in fact points out that he quite honestly tries to avoid him at all costs, because as he points out, Gato apparently has a very notably not very likable disposition, and very few people actually come back from visiting him. So for that reason, they point out that he points out that they'll need to be on their best behavior, and also hope that they find the place and are careful. At which point they see some volcano trolls, which of course all work for Gato, as we find out, and it's at this point where Blinky walks up to one of them and requests an audience with Gato. And of course, the trolls then proceed to just kind of lead them up the mountain and to where Gato is. Meanwhile, the Strickler, of course, gets in his car after day at school, and he gets in, and he sees Angor Rot's eyeball on the dashboard, and then adjusts the mirror so he can look at Angor Rot in the back seat, and of course Angor then proceeds to tell him where they're going, about how he then proceeds to point out that he knows that the Trollhunters are planning something, but he doesn't fully know what, because as he goes on to explain, he couldn't quite get his eye to a position where he could see what was going on, but he does point out that they are going to Gato's keep. And he then proceeds to explain how he knows Gato. He knows they're probably not going to make it back alive, and points out that the whole situation with the Trollhunters probably worked itself out on its own. So for that reason, he's not particularly worried about what's going to happen with the Trollhunter. And of course, Strickler congratulates Angor on his good work, but then also asks him if he got him what he requested, and of course, it's at this point where Angor Rot then proceeds to pull out 2 smaller totems, which are similar to the ones he uses to make golems. So I'm not going to repicture them, but of course, he goes on. Of course, he then proceeds to go on to explain. He then proceeds to ask Strickler if he knows what he's doing with them, and Strickler then proceeds to tell him that of course he does, but then also proceeds to contradict that by asking exactly how they work. And of course, he's at this point. And of course, Angor then proceeds to go on to explain how he just has to make them both, as he puts it, they both have to take in their essence, and the woman's fate will be tied to his. And which point. He then proceeds to thank Angor for his services, and then proceeds to go and meet with Barbara. And of course, Barbara then proceeds to vent to Strickler about everything that's been going on, about how Jim just kind of walked out of the house when she tried to ground him, and points out that things have he's gotten a lot harder to control lately, and she points out that it's starting to become a problem. It's starting to affect her relationship with her son, and she doesn't really know how to handle it. And it's of course where Strickler then proceeds to reassure her, pointing out that she's doing the best that she can, and that in the case where you can't really control everything, so it's more so a better idea to just focus on what you can control rather than what you can't. And of course Barbara does take that to heart, and does thank him for that, and also points out that she's very happy that he invited her for coffee, pointing out that she does like him, does kind of like hanging out with him a bit, and likes seeing him, and he points out that he likes seeing her too. At which point, as she starts to take a call and for work, he then proceeds to pull out the 2 totems, and though he does notably hesitate, he proceeds to place a totem in each of their cups. And of course, Barbara, unaware of what he's done, then proceeds to take a sip from her coffee, and pointing out that seems to be very strong today. And he does point that it does have a sort of enchanting quality to it before taking a sip himself. And of course, it's at this point where they just cuts back to the group and Gato's keep in Ojos de Salado. And they proceed to climb to the top of the mountain, where they do note that the trolls did point here and say that he was here, but are visibly confused as to why they can't find him. But then they just hear a voice and requests, and of course Toby then also proceeds to call him a butt snack as well, pointing out that he's probably is one. But of course, at this point where Gato then proceeds to reveal himself, and they hear a disembodied voice, and then they eventually look around and eventually do see Gato, and what we find out is that Gato is a mountain troll. A very big one, I should mention. So the thing about mountain trolls is that they're a lot bigger than their normal troll, and by a lot, obviously the word mountain is there for a reason. They're literally the size of mountains. And I should mention something interesting as well. So obviously, mountain trolls are mountain trolls are interesting, and obviously the entire point of this series is to establish that Jim is the first human troll hunter. I should mention, however, he is not the first unique troll hunter, because as it turns out, and this is a funny little side bit that I think I should mention here because it's hilarious, and I don't think I'll have another opportunity to bring it up. But at one point during the troll hunter legacy, there was in fact a troll hunter named Magmar the Molten. And Magmar is notable for being the only mountain troll to ever take the mantle of Troll Hunter, which is hilarious because considering the fact that he's a lot bigger than your typical troll, by like 10 times, easily 100 times the size, it is funny because now the visual in my head is that there's just this large dude just being able to effortlessly slay trolls or whatever, because he is just massive. And his sword subsequently is massive. He can just kill everything in one hit. And that is just a very funny visual to me. But of course, back to Gato, he then proceeds to wonder aloud why they're there. And it's of course they point out Blinky then proceeds to just tell them that they've requested an audience with him, and does proceed to tell them that they what they seek, but Gato then proceeds to interrupt him, telling them that he's not really going to discuss business on an empty stomach, and of course right on cue, a volcano troll proceeds to bring him a ton of rocks, but he eats the troll along with it, which of course disturbs the rest of the group. But afterwards, he then tells them to continue, and they too tell them that they are looking for the birthstone, and of course they tell them that they plan to kill Gunmar with it. But and of course Gato then proceeds to tell them that he doesn't really wonder why he should care, and does ask them why he should give it to them, and does point out that it would be doing a good service to all Trollkind, because obviously Gunmar is very dangerous, and does wonder what they could offer does wonder what they would offer him in return, and of course after pondering for a minute, Gato then proceeds to ask them if they could give them an answer to a riddle, which of course. And of course he then proceeds to tell them that if they can't answer the riddle, that they will be eaten alive, which of course concerns them all, and they realize that it's going to be a life or death thing. But of course Jim then reassures them, telling them that he's going to absolutely find a thing, because obviously Claire is established to be good with riddles in this episode. So he then proceeds to and of course when they realize that Claire can very much help them, he then proceeds to tell them that they accept. At which point Gato then proceeds to give them the riddle, which is as follows: I begin but have no end, and end all that begins. And he then proceeds to give them a countdown where everybody proceeds to rack their brains and panics a little bit because they don't really know the answer. And Claire seems to be the only one who's figuring it out. Of course, Art's a little bit slower, so he's having a bit of he's soft-spoken, so he's having a little bit more difficulty figuring out how to actually figure out what the solution is. Meanwhile, Toby eventually gets so flustered that he can't really think of the answer, and starts just blurting out random answers in the hope that they'll eventually stumble across one. And of course Gato isn't helping because he's counting down until they actually answer the question. But eventually Claire does in fact figure it out, and figures out that the answer is death. It begins but has no end, and ends all that begins. And Gato is visibly surprised, pointing out that nobody has ever answered that question, but also points out that nobody has lived that question and lived to tell about it. At which point he reveals the twist that he was just gonna eat them regardless of whether or not they answered the riddle correctly. And of course, to this point where Blinky then proceeds to scold him, pointing out that he clearly had no interest in ever giving them the birthstone, and tells them that he was planning to eat them regardless, and just hoard treasure for himself to lure unsuspecting trolls to their deaths. And of course it's at this point where his volcano trolls then proceed to hurt everybody into Gato's mouth. And though Jim tries to fight them off with his amulet, he is unable to save Blinky and Toby, who are in fact eaten by Gato. But of course, which of course causes Jim and Art to both go into a frenzy and with Art trying to get into Gato's mouth to try and get them back. But Claire then proceeds to reassure them, telling them that they could still be alive because it was established that it takes a very long time for people to digest something, and that they're probably fine. But that doesn't really set Jim's mind at ease, but they do decide to escape and realize that they have to get out of there. So he then proceeds to get them all out. Meanwhile, it is revealed that Blinky and Toby are in fact alive and have arrived in Gato's keep, which Blinky, after looking around for a little bit, discovers that it is in fact Gato's stomach. And of course he looks around, sees all the various treasures and everything else that are lying around, and does remark that there's got to be a virtual smorgasbord of things that are there, and does point out that they'll have to look for it. But of course they then proceed to see piles of gold, and of course Toby tries to scoop some of it up, but Blinky then proceeds to tell him not to do that because he points out that even the smallest of little objects could absolutely be scooped up, and could absolutely have some sort of curse on them to turn them into some horrible, disconfigured thing. But then he immediately disregards his own advice by picking up a small Roman penny, which he points out that he hasn't seen in a long time. But then proceeds to put it back when Toby gives him a look. At which point they start digging around the treasure, and they quickly realize they need to find the thing that they're trying to look for, but quickly realize it, and at which point, Blinky then proceeds to tell Toby to text Jim and let him know that that's something that they're fine and that they're going to be looking for the stone. But of course, Toby objects, pointing out that that wouldn't be very good, that he doesn't have an international plan. But Blinky just yells at him, telling him that he'll cover the charges, which is funny. It also somehow implies that Blinky has some way of getting human money, which is fun, which is a funny little visual gag thing. But of course, at this point where he does in fact text Jim, and of course, this winds up becoming a recurring bit for the rest of the episode, where as Jim is trying to escape with his friends through from Gato's Keep, Toby is in fact texting with Jim and letting him know that he's okay and that they're looking for the birthstone. And of course, Jim is just kind of currently trying to fight his way back to the gyre. So he doesn't really factor into the episode much at the end here. So I'm mostly going to be focusing on Toby and Blinky. But of course, Toby and Blinky both eventually conclude that it is kind of hopeless and that they're not going to be able to find anything regarding the birthstone, but eventually they realize a very obvious problem, that they're eventually going to be digested. But and of course they do proceed to request that they do find a way out. And eventually realize that they can't go back up Gato's esophagus to get back out of his mouth. It's because obviously it's too steep. But they do point out, and Blinky surmises that they're probably trapped and not going to be able to get out. But it's this point where Toby remembers what they covered in health class, which is that if they can't go out the front way, they'll have to go out the back way. And of course, Blinky doesn't fully understand what he's talking about at first, but then realizes that he means they have to be shit out, which of course causes him to make a face, and he realizes that it's a gross plan, but he realizes that they may have no choice. At which point, they then proceed to start throwing things into Gato's stomach to try and upset him and make it so that he will, poop them out. And of course they do start throwing things in. And Blinky does at one point pick up a bunch of potions, which of course he throws in and just winds up getting blown back by the resulting explosion, but and the resulting steam. But despite it affecting his vocal cords a little bit, it notably doesn't really seem to bother him all that much, and he seems to be fine, concluding that it seems to be mostly helium based. But of course, as they're continuing to look for more things to throw into the stomach, Toby eventually does in fact stumble upon the birthstone, and he concludes that is most likely the thing that they need to find. And of course, but of course, it's at this point where the lava has risen and they have to climb onto a platform to get out. And they do, and of course, they point out that Blinky points out that even though they found the birthstone, that they are going to inevitably have to find a way out. They're not going to be able to find a way out and live to tell about it. But then notes that Toby seems to be eating. Notes that Toby is stress eating his tacos, which Toby does point out that he stress eats when they're in a difficult situation. And it is of course at this point where Blinky realizes that he knows how to get them out. And then proceeds to grab the entire bag of tacos from Toby, much to Toby's objections. And Toby then proceeds to point out that that's his bag of tacos, and that they're extra spicy, and he doesn't know what they're going to do. But of course, Blinky, having tasted Toby's tacos firsthand, remarks that he knows exactly what they're going to do to a troll's stomach. And then proceeds to throw the entire bag in, which causes Gato to have indigestion, and causes him to stop trying to capture the rest of the group for a brief moment, because he's currently having tummy troubles. But of course, at this point where they kind of just get swirled out of the lava, and of course, it's at this point where Toby texts Jim telling him that they're going to be coming out the back passage, which takes a few minutes for them to figure out what they mean. But then they eventually do discover Gato's butt, and of course, Toby and Blinky then proceed to burst out. And with some help from Arg, they are eventually able to get the gyre going, because obviously the lava's flowing out, and they do note that some of the volcano trolls seem to be gone, and of course Claire points out that they probably knew that the place was going to blow, so they got themselves out. And of course, in any case, they proceed to return back to Geyer, and Blinky panics, trying to turn the Geyer on, which does not work very well for him. But of course, at this point where he then asks Arg to get out, and Arg does grab the Geyer and gets it started, and then proceeds to get back in, and then proceeds to just go back to America, where they will then proceed to celebrate their escape and victory, as the lava just kind of fills the Geyer station. Of course, they then proceed to get back to the tavern and troll market, where we finally see the birthstone. Toby then proceeds to place it on the table, and of course, Blinky is very happy about how they've acquired the birthstone, which is of course the first situation the first of many that they need, several that they need to acquire to defeat Gunmar. But does point out that now that they have it, he points out that it was such a beautiful sight. But does point out that. Then at which point Toby then proceeds to point out what they risked to get in there, but Blinky then proceeds to shut him up, pointing out that it's gross and he would rather not revisit the entire experience. But it's at this point where Blinky then proceeds to break wind, which of course he notes is unusual, and Toby points out that tries to once again point out that it's the grosser thing. That's the grosser thing that they obviously will not speak about. But then he decides that Toby declares that he's never going to eat again, but then sees a troll carrying some food and decides to go off and eat troll food because he points out that it's completely different from human food. And of course Jim and Claire just kind of chuckle at him while of course Blinky takes the birthstone and researches how they're going to actually use it to kill Gunmar. At which point Blinky and at which point Claire and Jim then proceed to go back out and leave Troll Market. At which point, we then cut back to Strickler, who is currently leaving Barbara's house and by extension Jim's house, and gets back in his car. And Jim confronts him in the back seat and is shown wearing his armor. And obviously, Strickler kind of understands what he's there for, but asks him what he owes the pleasure. At which point Jim then proceeds to summon his sword and tells him that if he ever sees Strickler talking to his mother ever again, he'll kill him. But of course, Strickler proceeds to point out that he knows he could, but that he'll do nothing of the sort, and does proceed to tell him that he's no doubt met his associate. And of course, Jim eventually knows who he's talking about, realizing he's referring to Angor Rot, and asks him who he is. And all he proceeds to point out that all he needs to know is that he's an ancient assassin with several mystical properties, and then proceeds to tell him that one of those mystical properties is in fact that he is linked to Jim's Barbara's fate to his own, and to demonstrate the point, then proceeds to deliberately cut himself on Jim's sword, which in turn causes Barbara to drop something inside because of the sudden pain that she suddenly feels in her finger. And also notes that there's a cut on her finger and wonders how that happened. And of course, both of them are sitting in the car, but they can hear it from outside. And of course, after realizing that Strickler's made his point, Strickler then proceeds to tell him that obviously he could he's hurt his mother enough, and asks him what he's going to do. And Jim, left with no other choice, desummons his armor and gets out of the car and goes inside. And of course, it's this point where he then proceeds to go back inside. So he's just forced to, leave Strickler alone for now until they can figure out what to do with Jim's mother. But of course, the episode then proceeds to end with of course Blinky researching the Triumbric Stone and how to how to use it. When suddenly, as he's reading the book on it, he notes that one of his hands has turned human, and he panics, and that's how the episode ends. So. Yeah, of course, first and foremost, this episode introduces us to, this is a thing that they've established that they wanted to do since the beginning, but they were only ever able to do it, now. But one thing that they've admitted that they wanted to do is that they wanted to dedicate more episodes to different troll worlds, and they obviously weren't able to do that. They wanted to, although unrealistically, they admitted that they wanted to make every episode dedicated to a new troll world and them going to explore a different region of trolls. But obviously that didn't work out in terms of storytelling and world building, because obviously they realized that wasn't a very organic way of introducing things. So they decided that this point would be the first time that we actually saw a new troll world. That is what they decided to do with this. But obviously they have the first Triumbric Stone. That's the big thing, because obviously the Triumbric Stones are going to be important for killing Gunmar later. So the fact that they have the first one is kind of important. But also more to the point, this episode first and foremost also demonstrates that obviously they've demonstrated that that now Strickler and Barbara are linked, which means Jim is now forced to play along with his mentor turned worst enemy, and obviously that is a thing that they are going to have to, you know, deal with and address, and there's nothing really they can do about that, unfortunately. There's not really anything they can do in regards to, dealing with Strickler. So for the time being, they kind of just have to put a pin in that, and they'll eventually get that when they get to that. But yeah, Strickler's effectively eliminated any chance that he'll be killed prematurely by binding his fate to Jim's mother. And obviously, Jim doesn't want to kill his mother, and also wants to make peace with her. So obviously, he's not going to be doing that. So yeah. Overall, pretty fun episode, and overall, I did like being able to explore, that we got to explore the new troll world, and obviously, Gato introduces one of my favorite, is the only example, unfortunately, in this series, of a mountain troll, which is one of my new favorite mythological creatures, because it's fun, because they made a giant volcano monster mountain troll thing, and it's cool. It's a cool idea. I do like it, and the fact that we only ever see, well, we see there are a handful of them in the novels, but the fact that we only ever see the one is kind of cool, and probably because he was expensive to animate. Let's be perfectly honest. He is big, he moves, he has arms and tries to grab them during the action sequence at one point. He's a big boy to animate, so obviously the fact that they limited it to one character is probably because of budgeting restrictions. That's most likely why. But in any case, I did enjoy this episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed my review of it. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my review. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on my Twitter. The link is down in the description. Be sure to check out my Discord if you want to connect with me further and just hang out. I do appreciate people who come to hang out on there, so I would appreciate it if you did that. But also, be sure to go and check out my Twitch as well. I stream Saturdays and Sundays, and this Saturday we are actually going to be streaming The Binding of Isaac 4 Souls Requiem. We're going to be unboxing that. That is a big thing that I'm going to be doing this weekend. So I hope you guys will go and check that out, because I've been excited to do this for you guys. I hope you guys will come out and hang out, and I hope you guys will enjoy that, and that is going to be fun, but I hope you guys will. Yeah, go do that. Also, be sure to go check out my Patreon if you want to help support me. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does help me out. It's my way of, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to go do that. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And also next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!